Hello everyone, I wanted to start off this post by saying that aliens are indeed real. Many people won't believe me or my story, but I know the truth. I'm telling all of you this story because I feel guilty for what I had done that night, and I also want to warn you about the atrocities that are going on all around the world. I'm a single, 29-year-old man living in Willow Creek, Oregon in a small home that I can barely afford. I usually work long hours to make ends meet at a job that I hate. My friends and love life is practically non-existent, and I really have no clue what I'm doing with my life. I truly have no purpose. I don't have any siblings, and I'm not particularly close with my parents anymore ever since they kicked me out of the house, leaving me homeless for a few months. You're probably wondering why I'm telling you all of this, and why my life sucks. I'm doing this because I believe that is why they chose me, and by they I mean the Hollywood little green men, although this time they were real. I was settling down for the night like I have done countless Sunday nights before. I grabbed a nice cold beer, sat on my couch, and put on the football game, American football, that is. I was particularly interested in this game because I had placed a bet that the Seahawks would beat the Cardinals. I really shouldn't have been betting with money. I really didn't have, but I digress. Anyways, the game was about 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter when I began to hear the neighbor's dogs barking like mad wolves. Not only that, but the wind also began to slowly pick up a little bit. Normally, my little part of town was quiet around this time with not much commotion, so I did think it was a little odd that such events were happening. I decided to step up from my dirty, beer-soaked couch and stretch out my legs on the front porch to my house, curious about the unusual nature of the atmosphere around it. I noticed something almost immediately. When stepping outside, all the homes in my little neighborhood were void of light. Their homes were sat with no lights on. I also noticed that the street lamps were also turned off. This was an odd scene because it was already dark outside. Why would no one have their lights on? Was there an issue with the grid? While pondering these thoughts, I noticed another strange thing. The sound from my TV was off. I turned around to find that my home was also void of light. My kitchen, living room, and TV lights were all turned off without me knowing. I began to feel an instinct of worry, but knew that this issue would most likely resolve itself in the morning. Plus, I had an early shift tomorrow, so I thought that I should get some well-needed rest. I headed to my room, laid down on my mattress, and fell asleep. I woke up, only to find myself in a dark scene, cold metal pressed against my body, an awful smell that made its way into my nose, and a woman crying to my right. She looked to be young, about the same age as me, maybe a little bit younger. I also noticed that I had heavy metal chains wrapped across my hands and around my neck. My vision was blurry and I couldn't see much. I began to panic, thinking I was dreaming until the woman, in a somber voice, said to me, "Thank God, you're awake. I thought they killed you too." I was confused, more than anything now, but thankfully my vision was beginning to improve as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. The room we were in was about 15 feet long and about 15 feet wide. It was made up of a dark purple metal that I did not recognize. There was an almost dim light in this room, but I found no source for where it could have originated. I also noticed that there were no doors or windows, seemingly no entryway or exit. I finally noticed another person in this room to my left. It was a man with pale blue skin who seemed to be unconscious. The woman spoke again. "Are you okay? Do you know what's happening? Did you see them?" I noticed that she was chained up in the way I was, but the man to my left wasn't. I spoke to the woman. "What's going on here? Where am I?" She looked disappointed in my response, probably expecting me to give her an answer to what I had asked her. She said, damn it, why is this happening to us? Why are they doing this to us?" I was still confused, hoping for some kind of answer when I asked her, "Please, tell me what's going on." She replied, "I don't know, and if I did, I would have told you by now so we could get the hell out of here." She paused, and then continued, "I'm sorry, I'm just really confused." And so was I, but I needed information, so I said, "Can you tell me what you know, even if it's just minor details?" She replied with a sad expression, "Okay, here's what I know. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and was having dinner with my roommates. When the lights went out, we thought nothing of it and went to bed. When I woke up, I was just here alone. And then sometime later, that wall in front of us somehow morphed into a doorway. 2, maybe 7 feet tall, white figures came through the doorway dragging that man's body into this room. I couldn't see them well because my vision was very blurry, so I didn't get a good look at them. But what I did notice was something that you don't need eyes for. I heard that man screaming in terror like he was being burned alive, only he wasn't. He was looking up at those things in horror. One of them lunged its so-called hand, if that's what you could call it, into the man's throat. The man began to choke and make the most gut-wrenching noises I have ever heard a human make. The man was suffocating and suffering. He dropped to the floor after a few moments. He was dead. The other thing in the room began to make noises that almost sounded like displacement. It seemed angry at what the other one had just done. They tossed the man's now deceased body into the room, and he's been there since. I later passed out in exhaustion and woke up to you lying next to me, chained up in the way I am. And now we're here. I was shocked at the words she spoke. I didn't want to believe it. I was terrified, praying to a God that I didn't believe in to take me out of this hellish nightmare. Just as the woman was about to speak again, the wall in front of us began to shake, exposing a doorway that was not there before. Sure enough, two tall white figures stood at the doorway, only this time I could clearly see their distinct, horrid features. They both indeed stood around 7 feet tall, and were purely white. They were naked, wearing no clothes, but they had no reproductive organs that I could see. They were in the shape of a human but had no fingers or toes. Their skin was smooth with no hair, bumps, or grooves. And what stood out the most was that they had no eyes or nose. They indeed had a mouth though, which one of them began to speak with. Its words were incomprehensible, spewing out noises that made no sense and had no pattern. Its voice was raspy and had a deep tone to it. It began to attempt its speaking again, only this time I could almost make out what it was trying to say. Let's play. I didn't know what it meant by this, but I didn't have to, because after it said this, its face began to form 2 eyes. As soon as I looked into its newly formed red eyes, I began to feel nauseous and fell back, leaning onto the wall behind me. I passed out cold. I woke up in a different room, only this time it was much larger than the previous one I remembered, and it was made from a lightly colored material. I was sitting in a comfortable cushioned chair with a small table post directly in front of me. Further in front was one of these things from before, dressed in some kind of black clothes, and was holding something. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it resembled some kind of small, dark stick with a large foam ball attached to the top of it. Behind it was maybe 10 rows of bleacher seats that sat more of these things, which were all dressed in what I could only assume to be fancy alien-like attire. I looked to my left and noticed 3 more people sat in the same chair with the same table, and to my right, the woman I had met merely moments earlier. All 5 of us were chained down to these chairs so that none of us could escape. The being in front of all of us began speaking to the group of its kind. The lights got dim as it spoke. I couldn't understand a single thing it was saying, and I could tell based on my fellow humans' expressions. Neither could they. The thing in front of us, which I will now refer to as an alien, turned to face us. We all squirmed in fear, anticipating its next actions. One of the humans seated at the far left of me spoke out. "Who are you people? Let me go. I'm a rich and powerful man. I can sue you. I've got good lawyers that..." Just before the man could finish his sentence, the alien pointed at him. The whole room went dark except for a dim, red spotlight aimed directly at the man. The man said, "What's happening?" He began to scream, which slowly built up more and more in volume until I needed to plug my ears from how loud he was belting out. I noticed that the aliens in the back of the room pulled out what I could only assume to be clear umbrellas, as if they were in the splash zone at SeaWorld or something. And then something happened that I can never unsee and will be engraved into my brain for as long as I live. The man's head exploded into hundreds of pieces, spewing blood and brains all over his section of the room. A girl that was to the right of him screamed in horror as she was now covered in his remains. I couldn't believe what I saw. The alien in the front bowed to its audience, which made them erupt into clapping and cheering. The lights turned back on, and the alien, which I now knew to be a host, began speaking into the thing it was holding. I also learned now that it must have been a microphone that he was holding. The alien host began speaking its foreign language again, gesturing towards us. Then suddenly, a transparent hologram screen appeared in front of all our tables. It read, "Galactic Odyssey Co." in perfect English. I noticed that the man directly to my left had a similar screen, although his words were in what I could only assume to be Japanese. From this, I learned that these aliens tailored our screens to our own native languages. The alien audience began to clap for a few seconds until their host began to speak again. After it said a few words, all our screens changed and showed us a question with 3 answers below it, and above the question was a timer that was counting down from 30 seconds. I quickly understood what was happening here. We were on some kind of alien game show and had to answer questions, or they'd kill us like they just killed that other guy for not cooperating. I turned to my right and already noticed that the woman was reading her question. The host made a growl at me for this, and I quickly turned my head towards it. It shook its head side to side, and so I looked back at my screen. The question read, "How many planets are in your local solar star system? 3, 9, or 8? I wasn't actually sure what the answer was. I wasn't a science geek, so how would I know? I knew that it couldn't be option 3, because there were definitely more planets than 3. I began to count in my head: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Wait, was Pluto a planet? Was the answer 9? I looked up to find that I only had 10 seconds left. I noticed to my right that the woman had already pressed one of the answers, although I couldn't tell which one. I think these aliens set up the screens in such a way that we couldn't cheat. 5 seconds left. 3, 2. I pressed option 8 out of a sheer guess. I wasn't sure of the correct answer. Once the timer hit 0, an ear-pearling noise filled the room. The question disappeared, and my screen lit up green. Did I get it right? I turned to my right and noticed that the woman's screen was also the same color as mine. I turned to my left, and the man beside me had a screen filled with red. He must have got the answer wrong. The audience of aliens began to laugh at the man uncontrollably. The man looked up at the host and began pleading in a language that I did not understand. The lights went dark, and the man sitting next to me was only illuminated by a dim, red light. He began to scream in a way like the previous man, and I covered my face with my hands, knowing now what was to come. He gave one last screech when I heard it, the sound of a human head being blown to bits. I was covered in his blood, but not as much as I was expecting. The girl that was to the left of that man had a green screen like mine, so she got the answer correct as well. The next thing that happened was the host speaking again, talking to the audience. It turned to us as well and began clapping at us for passing the first round. It murmured in a barely understandable voice, saying, "Congratulations." After he said this, the audience began clapping. They all stopped after our next question appeared in front of us on our screens. At this point, there were only 3 of us left, and I had to answer all the questions correctly to survive. I gulped and read the next question. Which element is commonly used as fuel for warp drives and interstellar travel? Dilithium, unobtainium, trilithium. What the hell? How was I or any of us supposed to know the answer to this? For all I knew, warp drives weren't even real. Or were they? Did I really have to make another guess? With mere seconds left, I made a complete and utter guess. I chose trilithium once again. After I selected it, my heart sank once the red light from my screen illuminated my face. I honestly didn't feel scared or worried. I felt confused and in denial. This had to be a dream. I couldn't have gotten the question wrong. I can't die. There's so much that I still wanted to do. I turned to my right and noticed that the woman had a green screen. She had gotten the answer right. I was happy for her. I didn't know her, but I wished the best for her and hoped that she could escape and get the story out there of what had happened to us all tonight. But then I turned to my left and noticed that the other remaining girl had a red screen, just like mine. What did this mean? Do we both die now? The host then began to speak as the audience awed his words. Then 2 buttons showed up on both mine and the girl's screens, 1 red button and 1 green button. I didn't know what it meant, but I soon realized that it was a speed test as there was a 5-second timer above the 2 buttons. I looked at the girl and she looked at me. I turned as quickly as I could and raised my right hand to press the green button as the girl did the same. As soon as I pressed it, the room went dark, only illuminating the girl with the same dim, red light as before. The girl turned to me and began cursing me. She screamed, "You damn cheater, you cheated. Please, give me one more chance. Please." She stopped talking and began screaming a horrid scream, and then, thup, just like the others. Once again, the alien crowd began cheering, but I couldn't help but feel guilty. I felt that I had just murdered that poor girl. I know it wasn't my fault, but I still pressed that button. 2 of us remained. The next question appeared, only this time, it was a short answer question. The question read, "What is your biggest regret?" I'll admit, I wasn't expecting a written response question, nor the question itself. Then again, I also wasn't expecting to get kidnapped by aliens tonight. I looked more at my screen and noticed that we both seemed to get extra time for this question, with the timer now reading 2 minutes. I'm glad we received extra time because I really couldn't think of an answer. I thought as hard as I could, but I froze up. I looked up and saw that a minute had already expired. I was beginning to panic until I remembered my parents. I remembered how life used to be. We used to see each other every week. We would talk about our days, grill some food, play board games. I remembered how I felt during those days. I remembered that I used to be happy. I wished that I had spent more time with them before everything went downhill. That was my biggest regret. I was about to type my response until I realized that there was no need to. The screen somehow knew exactly what I wanted to say. The time expired, and I anticipated the response, except this time there was no red or green color. The host began speaking to the audience, and the finely dressed aliens suddenly had their own translucent screens in front of them with only 2 symbols on them that I did not understand. Although I did understand what it meant, this was a vote, and the audience was our judges. My heart was racing like I was running a marathon. They were the ones who would decide our fate. The aliens in attendance began pressing one of the symbols almost all at the same time, with a few still taking a few extra moments to decide. Ultimately, once they all made their selections, there was a brief pause, and the room went silent until my screen had flashed green and the woman's screen had turned red. My heart began to settle down because they chose me. The woman began to tussle with her chains in an attempt to release herself, but there was no escape. The host turned towards me, and with a wave of its arm, my chains were undone. I was free, but I did not run. I wasn't sure what to do, so I stood up. The host raised one of its arms, morphing the microphone it had been holding into something. The thing it had created resembled a gun, albeit nothing like the weapons that we humans have ever created. It handed me this gun and gestured towards the woman. I immediately understood what it was wanting me to do. The entire crowd of aliens stood up from their seats in anticipation. Time seemed to slow down as the woman to my right, a stranger, turned to me and said, "Please, don't do it. I beg of you, please, don't do it." She had tears pouring from her eyes, which were bloodshot red. She kept pleading with me, begging me not to do it, and I didn't blame her. I didn't want to shoot her, but I did want to survive. I wanted to live so very badly. I would do whatever it took to get out of this goddamn place. And so, I said, "The woman, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I squeezed my finger and pulled the trigger. The bullet had viciously pierced right through the front of the poor woman's skull and out the other side at a high speed. Her lifeless body dropped to the floor, and as did mine. I dropped to my knees, crying for what I had just done. The audience began cheering the loudest they ever had tonight. They began throwing black roses towards my direction as a triumphant song began playing. The host crookedly walked over to me and attempted to speak my language once more, saying, "You win." The crowd continued its roar of applause and amusement, and I continued my cries of guilt, but I couldn't help but feel happy that I won this horrible game. The host looked towards me, and I noticed that his face conjured the same red eyes that I saw from the other alien from before. I began to feel lightheaded and fell backwards as my vision faded to black. The last thing I heard was the unforgettable cheers from my audience. I woke up and found myself in a field, which I later found out was about 15 miles away from my house. It was still dark outside, and only the moon and stars illuminated the field. I heard the soft roar of an engine from above and looked up to see a massive, dark sphere rotating about a mile above from where I was. It stood stationary there for a moment and then soared off into the sky and out of the atmosphere, never to be seen again. The aliens must have dropped me off here and let me go as my reward for winning their disgusting game. However, I couldn't believe that I was actually back on the ground. I felt so grateful to be alive until my memory hit. I had killed someone, and I had to remember that and live with all the events that had transpired that night for the rest of my own morbid life. I couldn't help myself and threw up in the field. I wanted more than anything to wish this whole experience away, but I knew that it wouldn't. I began my walk back to my town and back home. I'm still processing everything that happened that night, and I'm not sure what to do with this information. I hope that none of you have to go through this, and I hope that the aliens do not choose you for their next game.